Hilarious hag Citlali will be coming to the game soon, and what do you know, she's a cryo character. So today, I thought it'd be fun to discuss what could be done to save a cryo element, in hopes that Citlali will do some of these things. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. The most obvious thing Hoyo could do to fix cryo would be giving Melt plenty of special attention. We basically have zero specialized units for it, and despite it existing for a very long time, it's hardly been touched. The annoying thing is that Melt could be the reaction to Rival Vaporize. Cryo could unironically be an absolutely fantastic element if Melt was given the same amount of attention that Vaporize got, because the multipliers for Melt are also really high, but we have very few supports that care. The funny thing is that Riesli and Ganyu exist. It's not like we don't have cryo DPSs that can utilize Melt comps, yet we basically have zero supports tailored to Melt specifically. Dude, we have freaking Mika for physical, yet we haven't got a Farazan or Chevreuse for Melt? Because honestly, Riesli and Ganyu have really decent potential, it's just that Hoyo refuses to touch cryo in any capacity. The obvious reason for this is that they're waiting for Sneznaya. They've probably been saving the Melt reaction all this time up until that point, but considering how Notlon has been consistently filling in missing gaps in terms of team archetypes that we're missing, would it be far-fetched to believe that perhaps Hoyo was planning to throw Melt a bone with Citlali? Nothing can be said for certain yet, but it's such an obvious gap fill that would benefit cryo really well if executed right. Shoot, my insane copium is that they're waiting to buff Melt before they rerun Riesli. But because the folks at Hoyo are as allergic to ice as Venti is to cats, we haven't seen that buff in a hot minute. Save us, Citlali, save us! The damage dealers are fine. We have Riesli, his teams are greatly potent. We have Ganyu, she's as flexible as ever. Improve upon those two teams, and Cryo immediately becomes a much better element. More DPSs for it wouldn't hurt though. Considering that the last Cryo 5-star that was released before Riesli was Shenhe in 2.4. Yeah, it's actually been that long. The gaps between releases for this element are huge, even with Rio coming out in 4.1 and Citlali coming in 5.3. Compare that to Pyro and Hydro, where it feels like we're getting new characters of that element every other week. Even so, we should focus on the supports first. Rerunning Shenhe would be a good start, considering that she's been thrown into the same basement as Rio, and trying to improve upon what's present in these teams might also be beneficial. So when it comes to new support, Citlali really has to bring something fresh to the table. Considering how poorly Cryo is currently perceived by folks, I wouldn't be surprised if most people were skeptical as to how good she's actually going to end up being. I know that I myself am really skeptical because it's been in such a bad state for a long time, and the idea of any massive buffs coming before Sneznaya sounds pretty bizarre. Citlali has to increase the damage that Melt units deal by some amount. I don't know how, but she has to. The only concern I have, however, is that I'm not sure how she's going to replace the current teammates that make up the two best Melt teams in the game. Replacing anybody in Rio's Bennett, Farina, Xiangling core sounds a little rough. Everybody is there for a purpose. Bennett heals for fanfare and good buffs, Farina's damage bonus percent, and Xiangling's fantastic pyro application. I can potentially see Mavuika replacing Xiangling here, or even Mavuika working with Xiangling while swapping Farina out for Citlali. This is under the assumption that whatever Citlali does is insanely beneficial to the team, because it'd be very hard to justify her over Farina otherwise. Plus, she has to beat Shenhe at her role, because you can just as easily play Rio, Mavuika, Xiangling, and Shenhe too. If we assume that Mavuika wants other Notlon characters in her teams, then perhaps Citlali will end up beating Shenhe by default, as it'd be more worth using the Pyro Archon over tending to Shenhe's great cryo buffs. This is assuming that she'll end up being an insane unit, but she's an Archon, so it'd be strange of us to think that she'd suck or that she'd be lackluster. If Mavuika's Pyro application is good enough, then you could even run Rio, the Biker, Shenhe, and potentially Citlali. But I'm a bit concerned that that'd be way too much cryo application. We don't officially know what Citlali does, so for all we know, she could apply zero cryo, and that's all fine and dandy. But if she does, then I'm not sure how consistent melting in that team would be. Perhaps Xiangling could end up being a better slot-in if her Pyro application outdoes Mavuika's, but we'll have to wait and see. Either way, the releases of both of those two have a lot of potential when it comes to maybe buffing up Rio's teams, but that could be a big pile of hopium on my end. He himself is pretty strong anyway, but I wouldn't say no to general Melt buffs. I do hope they do this in a way which doesn't harm Shenhe. She had only a couple of patches to shine before Freeze was wiped off of the face of Tvat, and then she was sent into solitary confinement after her last rerun. It'd be kinda goofy for them to kill the poor lass of Citlali. Also, I think both are peaks, so I'd rather use them both in the same team. If Mavuika ends up being a DPS, who's to say that she won't end up benefiting from Melt teams too? After all, it goes both ways. Cryo could support Pyro DPSs. I do think that's a bit redundant since Pyro seriously doesn't need the help in my opinion, but no matter how different Hoyo tries to make each Pyro DPS, they always end up being a vape carry. So it'd at the very least add some much needed variety to that niche. I'd be pretty disappointed if Citlali only helped Pyro DPSs though. Variety is the spice of life, and being able to try out Melt Linny and Melt Lakino sounds like a whole lot of fun. I'd be down for that, but I'm less down for ignoring Cryo DPSs by introducing a new Cryo unit if that makes sense. Take a shot of water for every time I've said Cryo in this video, it'll help you keep hydrated. I'm also interested in seeing how this will evolve Chaska Melt. People who got Shenhe before the Great Disappearance have been doing some funky combos with her and Chaska, which has been really cool to see. So that makes me wonder how she'll work with Citlali in her best melt comps, something like Bennett, Farina, Citlali. The cool thing is that with a C1 Chaska, you could set aside our beloved Lady Farina for Shenhe to run a pure melt team. Or even replace Bennett with Mavuika to push the team even further. There's a lot of goofy potential here, which I like to see. In terms of Ganyu teams, you've kinda lost me there, buddy. I don't know how we're gonna replace any of the main teammates that make up Melt Ganyu. Now old Melt Ganyu? Super easy to improve upon. Swap Zhongli out for Citlali and Shangling for Mavuika. Problem solved. However, modern Melt Yu? Yeah, I'm not so sure. Nahida provides a crap ton of VM, which is seriously good for that team, and there's also Emily as a good option to sustain burning on the enemies, and if you have a well-invested Shenhe, where are you going to slot her in? At the end of the day, what matters more is how good the buffs Citlali will provide will be. If she barely does anything for the team, then nothing changes. If her buffs end up being utterly incredible, then it looks like we're going out with the old in with the new. She could end up being a DPS, sure, especially because Riesli is the most modern Cryo DPS we currently have, but I'd personally prefer a new support unit. Another thing that I think Cryo really needs is some new gear. Do any old players here remember back when Blizzard Strayer was this insane breakthrough set? Who remembers when one of the craziest things about Cryo back in the day was how easy it was to get crit rate from characters like Rosaria, from Cryo Resonance, from 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, from Ganyu's Ascension passives? It was all considered to be so darn impressive. Now it's just not. That much free crit rate was an insane breakthrough back in the day when we had no other crit rate providing sets. It was a massive DPS increase to all Cryo DPSs and made optimizing their stats infinitely easier. You could clear the abyss of a super garbage Ayaka back then, because all you needed was about 200 crit damage, 4-piece Blizzard Strayer, and then you were good to go. Plus, basically every enemy was freezable. Nowadays, it's a much more accessible stat. Our beloved Farina is one of the most flexible characters in the game, working in essentially any team you ask her to as long as you've got a healer by her side. So she allowed every DPS to use 4-piece hunters, which meant that you could get free stats on nearly all of them. There was a very small amount of characters who couldn't utilize this free crit rate gimmick, and most of the time it always ended up being a DPS's hypothetical best in slot. I say hypothetical because then you have to play your DPS with Farina, which can be annoyingly restrictive to some, but if you can put up with that, then all DPSs could access it. Not to mention the slew of excellent Fontaine DPSs who don't even need Farina in order to consistently proc 4-piece hunters. If they use her in their teams, great, good for them. But she isn't a necessity in order for these guys to trigger 4-piece hunters. For example, Linny, Riesli, Nouvelette, you get the idea. They have inbuilt HP loss mechanics, making crit rate an even more common stat. Then you cut to current day, and Blizzard Strayer only continues to look lamer and lamer as time goes on. 4-piece Codex front loads 40% crit rate onto any Night Soul-based DPS user. That is unfathomably ridiculous, and I'm not surprised that we haven't gotten a new artifact domain in Notlan yet, because how in the world are you supposed to follow up on sets like that? Sure, Strayer gives a lot of rate, but it'll only give you 20% as opposed to the full 40% if you're not freezing enemies. And with how many unfreezable foes are running amok in the Abyss these days, how the heck is anyone supposed to fully proc Blizzard Strayer? Shoot, Riesli himself is a 4-piece Hunters user. Bring in some brand new artifact sets for older characters such as Ganyu, or maybe even for Shenhe so she can offer more buffs to your teammates, because they're lagging behind pretty badly. I'm 99% sure that Citlali is going to use 4-piece Intercity, unless she's getting her own new dedicated artifact set. I can't see what she would gain out of using any of the other ones, considering how much they all kind of suck for Cryos at the minute. It can be frustrating to have to form up an entirely new set for a character, but it's a necessary evil in order to raise the reputation up of these older characters. New weapons is something that I'm less concerned about because they're gonna be a lot less accessible if they're gacha exclusive or if they're a limited 5-star option. Or shoot, even if they're a standard 5-star, because my god, I have rolled on every page AWS banner only to have a grand total of 0. Sure, I have Aqua Simulacra, but is that really worth having over Xiao's lore weapon? Yes, because Home is better on him, but anyways. That aside, artifacts would be the way to go. You know this element is cooked when freaking Charlotte is one of the most valuable characters that we currently have in this element to date. Citlali is cryo, so I'm trying to hold on to some hope here. I'm trying not to cryo my eyes out, if you will. Every not long kid has been good at worst and utterly fantastic at best. So I really hope Hoya won't fumble the bag here. She's coming out right after an Archon, so I don't know if that's for the better or worse. But I'd say it's definitely better than her being put before the Archon. She's avoiding the dreaded X.5 curse, so we can be reassured that at the very least, she will indeed be functional when she releases. But what do you think about all of this? Can Citlali save cryo, or is this all just a huge pile of copium? Let me know down below in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video was able to tell you what could potentially be done to save cryo, and how Citlali could assist in its revival. This has been Juice, signing out, and to be honest, even if cryo sucks in gameplay, they literally never miss a fair limited 5 stars in terms of design and lore. Literally look at all of these. They are all incredible characters. Man, it sucks being a cryo fan. Peak characters, garbage kits.